The rain was tapping softly against the windowpane, a steady rhythm that usually felt comforting. But that night, it just sounded like a countdown. We were in the living room, the only light coming from a single lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across the floor. The air was thick, with a tension that had been building for weeks, maybe even years. It was one of those quiet evenings that felt anything but quiet. He was on the sofa scrolling through his phone, and I was in the armchair clutching a notebook to my chest. It was my idea notebook filled with sketches, business plans, dreams. I'd whispered to myself. For a decade, I finally found the courage to voice one of them, to talk about going back to school, about finally pursuing the design career I'd abandoned. When we got married, I spoke softly, my words, tentative, hoping he'd see the spark in my eyes. The next morning I started. It was a silent, private grind. I stopped talking about my dreams with him altogether. Our conversations became about the weather, the groceries, the mundane details of life. It was like I had built a wall around the most important part of myself, and I was working furiously behind it. All the long-suppressed feelings surfaced: my anger, my loneliness, my profound disappointment. His defensiveness, his confusion, his own hurt. The core question wasn't spoken, aloud, not at first. But it hung in the air between us, more powerful than any of our shouted words. The question was, can a relationship survive such a fundamental shift in power dynamics? For so long the power dynamic was unbalanced, in his favor, built on his certainty. And my uncertainty. Now the tables had turned. I was certain I knew who I was, and he was the one who was lost. Could we build something new from that? Or was the old foundation too cracked to hold the weight of this new reality? Now we're at the crossroads. There's no going back to what we were. That marriage is over. The question is there a new one to be built? The options are clear, and both are terrifying. We can try to rebuild, but it would require new boundaries, a new language. It would require his genuine, sustained accountability, not just an apology after the fact, but a deep, fundamental change in how he sees me, how he believes in me. He would have to learn to be comfortable with my strength, not threatened by it. Or we can acknowledge that the journey has led us apart, that the marriage served its purpose for a season, but that season is over. My path leads forward, and his leads elsewhere. There's a possibility that the most profound act of belief in myself wouldn't be fighting for a marriage that may be beyond repair, but having the courage to walk away from it, to choose myself unequivocally. A partnership, a real one, has to be built on mutual belief. It has to be a foundation where both people can grow, and where that growth is celebrated, not feared. For so long I didn't believe I was enough. I thought I needed his validation to be whole. But going through this, becoming the person I saw on that screen, I learned that I am enough. The question now is whether our marriage is enough to contain that. Sometimes walking away isn't an admission of failure. Sometimes it's the ultimate act of believing in yourself. It's saying that your own journey, your own wholeness, is worth more than clinging to a broken thing, just for the sake of saying you didn't quit. The future is uncertain, but for the first time, I am certain of who I am walking into it. You know, you've heard it too, haven't you? That quiet, insistent whisper that slithers into your thoughts when you're about to take a risk, when you're standing at the edge of something new. The lie, it comes in so many forms, from so many directions. Sometimes it's a partner's dismissive comment, a casual remark about your ambitions being a little unrealistic. Sometimes it's the echo of a parent's voice, questioning your choices, always implying you could have, should have done better. It's the boss who overlooks your ideas, the friend whose constructive criticism always feels more like a demolition. It's the relentless scroll of social media, feeding you a curated perfection that makes your own life feel small and messy in comparison. The most dangerous source is the one inside your own head, that internal critic that learned all those external voices so well it started performing their greatest hits on a loop. It tells you you're not smart enough, not talented enough, not disciplined enough, not worthy enough. It tells you to play it safe, to lower your expectations, to be grateful for the crumbs, because y'all never have the whole meal. This lie, in all its forms, has one single destructive purpose: to hold you back, to keep you paralyzed by fear, trapped in a cage of someone else's making. It convinces you that the risk of failure is greater than the cost of staying silent, of staying small. I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning before anyone else was awake. The house was utterly still, a sacred quiet. I'd make a cup of tea and sit at the small desk in the corner of the spare room that became my headquarters. I dug out my old textbooks, I watched online tutorials, until my eyes burned. I practiced, and I failed, And I tried again. The self-doubt was a constant companion, a nasty little whisper in my ear. He's right, who do you think you are? There were mornings, I'd put my head down. I am here today to tell you with every fiber of my being that it was always a lie, every single word of it. It was never a reflection of your worth. It was always a reflection of their limitations, their own fears, their own insecurities, their own inability to see the vastness of your potential. They were handing you a map of their own confined world and telling you that was the only territory that existed. It's time to tear up that map. I remember the night the lie became so loud, I almost let it swallow me whole. It was a Tuesday, utterly ordinary. I had just come home from a workshop, my head buzzing with a new idea, a spark of a project that felt exciting, something truly my own. I was buzzing with it. And I made the mistake of sharing that buzz with my husband. I laid it out for him, this fragile, beautiful idea. And he listened, or at least he pretended to. When I finished, there was this silence. Then he smiled, this thin, patronizing smile. And he said, "That's a cute little hobby, honey. But let's be realistic. People like us don't get on TV. People like us." The words landed like a physical blow. They didn't just dismiss the idea, they dismissed me. They put me in a box, a small, dusty box, labeled not special. And for a moment I felt myself shrinking to fit inside it. The familiar heat of shame rushed to my face. The old scripts started playing in my mind. He's right, who do you think you are? You're getting ahead of yourself. It would have been so easy to just nod, to swallow the hurt, to pack the dream away, and go do the dishes, to succumb. Moment of choice right there in the crushing weight of those 5 words. A chasm opened up. On one side was the path of least resistance, the well-worn road of quiet acceptance. On the other side was a terrifying, unknown cliff. And I chose me in that suffocating silence. A different voice, one I hadn't heard in years, roared to life from somewhere deep in my gut. It was clear, and it was firm. It said no. I looked at him, and I saw not a partner but a jailer of my potential. And I realized his words weren't a verdict, they were kindling. I made a decision right then and there to use those words, that condescension, that entire moment of belittlement, as fuel. I would use it to start a fire within myself, a fire so bright it would burn that little box to ashes. Let me be very clear, the decision was just the first step. The journey that followed was not a montage set to inspiring music. It was hard, messy, and it was lonely. There were days the fire felt like it had gone out, choked by my own tears of frustration and doubt. I spent countless late nights working, my eyes burning. While everyone else was asleep, I faced rejection after rejection, emails that went unanswered, pitches that were politely declined. Each one felt like a confirmation of that original lie. The voice in my head would hiss, "See, he was right." But I learned you cannot do this alone. I had to consciously, deliberately surround myself with a new kind of sound. I found my people, the friend who would read my 10th draft and tell me it was brilliant, but only after pointing out exactly what needed fixing, the mentor who saw a spark in me. I couldn't see myself and fanned it relentlessly. I had to build a fortress of belief, brick by brick. With the help of those who genuinely wanted to see me shine, I had to learn to listen to their voices, to absorb desk and cry from sheer exhaustion and frustration. The urge to just go back to bed, to go back to the safe, numb existence, was almost overwhelming. Their encouragement, until it started to drown out the old toxic chorus. And slowly something began to shift. As I worked, I started to rediscover parts of myself. I had forgotten the passion for storytelling I had as a kid, writing elaborate plays in my notebook. The sharp, analytical mind. I used to solve complex problems at work, which I could now apply to building my own vision. The simple joy of creating something from nothing. With every small victory, every inch of progress, I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't just building a project, I was rebuilding me. And that's when I had the most profound realization. The goal was never actually to get on television. That was just a symbol, a milestone. The real goal, the entire point of the journey, was to get back to the person I was always meant to be before the world started telling her she was not enough. And that brings me to you right now. This is your moment. What is the dream you've been quietly putting off? What is that thing you think about in the shower or on your commute? The idea that makes your heart beat a little faster before you quickly shut it down. Is it the business plan saved in a hidden folder on your computer? The application for the course you're not qualified for, the first page of the novel you're afraid to write, the decision to finally leave the job, or the relationship that is slowly dimming your light? I need you to understand this: your validation cannot come from outside of you, not from a husband, a wife, a boss, a parent, a television producer. It has to come from within. The world will try to give you a scorecard, But you have to be the one who decides the rules of the game. That first step is the bravest one you will ever take. It doesn't have to be a giant leap. It can be a tiny, almost imperceptible shuffle forward. Send the email, make the phone call by the domain name, write the first sentence. For the job, that single act of defiance against the lie is a thunderous declaration to the universe and to yourself that you are choosing to believe in your own worth. So I am asking you right now to stop waiting for a sign, for permission, for someone to discover you. Stop waiting for the day you might be seen on some screen by the very people who doubted you. That is giving them power. They do not deserve. The most powerful recognition you will ever receive is the recognition you give yourself. Look in the mirror, see yourself. See the strength in your eyes, the resilience in your story, the undeniable fire of your spirit, that person staring back at you with all their flaws and their history and their beautiful untapped potential. That person is already everything they need to be. The ending of your story is not written. It is waiting for you to pick up the pen, write an ending of courage, write an ending of self-belief, write an ending where you are the hero, not the side character in someone else's narrative. You have carried the weight of that lie for long enough. It is time to put it down. Take a deep breath. Feel the space that opens up inside you. When that weight is gone, that space is where your future begins. You are enough. You always have been. You know, for the longest time I had this script. It wasn't something I ever read, but I knew it by heart. It was the script for The Good Wife. And it was everywhere in the movies I watched growing up, in the advice from older relatives, even in the casual compliments from strangers. She's such a good wife, they'd say. And it was the highest praise. It meant you were supportive, you were quiet in the best way. You made his career your priority, his ambitions your own. You were secondary, but in a noble, self-sacrificing way. But I had found a lifeline, my friend Sarah from my old college days. We reconnected over coffee one day, and I tentatively mentioned what I was doing. She didn't just encourage me, she demanded excellence. She became my mentor, my cheerleader, my reality check. Shed look at my designs and tell me honestly what worked and what didn't. She never once said it was impossible. She operated on the assumption that of course I could do it. Her belief was so unconditional, so fierce, that it started to drown out. You were never too loud, never too demanding, never too much. You were non-threatening to him and to the whole idea of the comfortable life you were building together. And I followed that script. I really did. I was the lead actress in my own little domestic play. I learned all my lines. Of course, honey, your work is more important. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. No, it's fine, really. I smoothed over the rough edges. I made sure the house was a haven from his stressful world. I was the calm, steady background against which his life could shine brightly. And for a while, I thought that was the point. I thought that ache I felt, that quiet, persistent hum of something missing, was just a character flaw, a sign that I wasn't trying hard enough to be content in my role. His comment that night, the one about the TV appearance, it wasn't just a criticism, it was a stage direction. It was a demand to get back in the box I was starting to outgrow. He saw the edges of the script fraying, he saw me peeking outside the lines. And his reaction was to slam the lid shut, to remind me of my part, the supportive wife, the one who stays home, the one who doesn't crave a spotlight of her own. The internal conflict was a war on one side, this deep conditioned desire to be what I was supposed to be, to make him happy, to not rock the boat, the fear that stepping out of this role was a betrayal of the vows I took of the life we built. And on the other side, this ache of unfulfilled potential that was getting louder and louder, until it was a scream I could barely contain inside my politely smiling mouth. The cultural pressures are immense. They're like currents pulling you back to shore when you try to swim out to deeper water. You're told you're being selfish, that you're risking a good thing, that you should be grateful for what you have. And that gratitude becomes a cage. You look at other women who seem to fit the mold perfectly, and you wonder what's wrong with you, why you can't just be happy, why this box, this perfectly nice, comfortable box, feels more and more like it's suffocating you. There comes a point, a moment of rebellion that feels less like a dramatic stand and more like a simple, unavoidable truth. I remember the moment so clearly. It was a Tuesday morning. I was folding his laundry, and I just stopped. I looked at that shirt in my hands, and I thought, this script is flawed. It's not just a little off, it's fundamentally suffocating. It was an audacity to want more, to want something for myself that existed outside of my support for him, to have an ambition that wasn't about making his life easier. Deciding that was the real turning point. It was the moment I stopped trying to fix myself to fit the role and started to question the role itself. And of course there was backlash. Stepping out of a prescribed role provokes a special kind of fear and control from the people who benefit from you staying in it. It's not always malicious sometimes. It's just a panic the system is breaking. And their part in it is threatened. His reactions became more pronounced. Where he used to just make a casual comment, now it was a debate, a negotiation. It was fear masked as concern. Are you sure you can handle that? Isn't that a lot on top of everything else you do? It was a constant low-grade attempt to reassert the old equilibrium, where his world was the center and mine orbited quietly around it. The voice of doubt, both his and my own, on the days I wanted to quit. I'd call her, and she'd listen for 5 minutes, and then say, okay, pity party, over what's the next step. She taught me how to build my own validation brick by brick. So I began my re-education. It was a slow process. I had to learn a whole new vocabulary for my own life, words like my ambition, my happiness, my time. I had to learn to prioritize myself without the accompanying wave of guilt. It was like building a new muscle. And it was sore for a long time. But the most important part of that journey was finding a new community. I found other women who were also quietly or not so quietly rewriting their own scripts. We championed each other, we celebrated a promotion, a published article, a successful business launch, not with a "but what about your husband," but with a "you deserve this." That support was everything. It was the proof I needed that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't crazy for wanting more. The TV appearance, that was the symbolic act. It was me claiming space in a public arena that has traditionally been dominated by men. It was me saying my voice matters, my work matters, not as an extension of my husband, but on its own merit. The message I wanted to send, even if I didn't say it out loud on that broadcast, was that a woman's value is not tied to her role within a marriage, that her success does not diminish her partner's, or if it does, that's a problem with the partner, not with her success. His shock, his utter disbelief that I would go through with it, that came from a place of deep adherence to the old script. In his version of the story, my part was clear. I was the supportive wife in the background. By stepping onto that stage, I was tearing up the pages. He was still reading from the reaction. He had the public hurt, the private anger. It represents a broader societal shift that is often resisted on the most personal, intimate level. The world is changing, but in millions of living rooms, the old rules are still being enforced. My story became a tiny battle in that very large. And it all leads to this essential question, the one I had to ask myself, and the one I think we all need to ask: what does a truly supportive partnership look like now? If it's not about one person playing a secondary supportive role, then what is it? I believe it's about mutual growth. It's about being two whole people celebrating each other's successes, not seeing them as a threat. It's about building a life where both people can shine, and where one person's light doesn't require the other to dim theirs. The foundation of it, all the thing I had to learn the hard way, is that being enough for yourself is the first step. You can't build a healthy relationship on the idea that someone else completes you. You have to be complete on your own. Then, a partnership becomes a choice, not a necessity. It becomes a collaboration of two fulfilled people, not a transaction where one provides stability and the other provides support. So my final challenge to anyone listening is this: take a quiet moment and examine the boxes you've been placed in: the good wife box, the provider box, the strong friend box, the dutiful daughter box. Look at the scripts you've been given for your life, read them carefully, and ask yourself, do they still fit? Do they allow you to breathe, to grow, to become the person you are meant to be? Or are the edges digging into your skin, reminding you of a role you outgrew a long time ago? You get to decide. You are the author of your own story. It's the most terrifying and the most liberating truth there is. Months turned into a year. The secret project in the spare room wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a full-blown portfolio. It was a part of me. I was different. I stood straighter. I held eye contact a little longer. The hollow feeling was being filled with something solid, something that belonged only to me. That sentence, it wasn't just words strung together. It was a living thing. It had a shape, a weight. Y'all never be enough. You could feel its edges, sharp and cold like a shard of ice you're forced to carry in your hand. At first it's just cold, a shock to the system. But then the real pain starts, the slow burning numbness, as it steals all your warmth. That was its texture, a constant chilling presence. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It grew. It had an ecology, a whole environment. It thrived in the soil, was doubt, that rich, dark earth of every insecurity I'd ever felt. And it was watered daily by silence, my silence, The things I didn't say in my own defense, the agreements I made without speaking a word. The fear was the sun, that nurtured it a harsh, glaring light, that made everything else seem small, and stunted that sentence put down roots. It didn't just live in the room, it lived inside me. It found a home in the quiet spaces, in the moments between heartbeats. It echoed in the empty hallway of a lonely afternoon. It would whisper itself when I looked in the mirror, shaping the face that looked back, shaping the reality I accepted as my own. And then came the decision, not a loud, dramatic one, a quiet internal eviction. Notice the decision to stop providing a home for it, to no longer offer it shelter in my mind, to cut off its water supply of silence, and let it wither in the light of a new kind of attention. I was evicting the toxic tenant that had lived rent-free in my soul for far too long. That was the beginning of the alchemy, the transformation. I think of it like the old philosophers trying to turn lead into gold. The lead was so heavy, it was the weight of those words, the feeling of worthlessness, a dense, dull metal that anchored me to the bottom of everything. It had no shine, no promise, just a cold, inert heaviness. Alchemy requires fire, a crucible, and that fire, it wasn't a destructive blaze. It was the intense, focused heat of hard work, the fire of staying up late to learn a new skill, when every part of you wanted to quit, the heat of vulnerability, of finally admitting out loud that you were hurt, the scorching truth of looking at your own fears directly, not flinching away. That's the furnace. It's unbearable at first. You feel like you'll be consumed. The lead of your old self begins to sweat, to melt, to lose its solid form. It's a terrifying process, to feel the structure you've known for so long become liquid and unstable. But that's the point. In that molten state, in that crucible of experience, the impurities start to rise to the surface. The lies you believed about yourself, the limitations you accepted, you skim them off one by one. It's painful, meticulous work. And what's left in the heat begins to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. The dull gray starts to gleam, a hint of yellow, a flash of something precious. The gold isn't something you find, it's something you forge. It's the newfound self-worth, resilient and shining, born from the very thing that once weighed you down. The lead doesn't disappear, it's transformed. The pain becomes strength. The doubt becomes wisdom. The alchemy is real. You look down one day and realize you're holding gold in your hands, and you forged it yourself from the darkest of materials. And when that moment came, the moment of validation, it wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't a scream of revenge. It was a note, a single, clear, perfect note, in a symphony I had been composing for years, for an audience of one me. The television appearance, the sound of my name being called, the lights, it was all just instrumentation. The contrast was so stark. I remembered sitting in the silence of that old house. The only sound, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the weight of that sentence pressing down on. The opportunity came out of nowhere. I saw a tiny ad online for a national design competition. The winner would get a feature on a popular morning show, a segment showcasing their work. It was a shot in the dark, so unlikely that it almost felt safe to try. I spent a week perfecting my submission, choosing pieces that felt the most authentic to my voice. I mailed the package and tried to forget about it. Me, and now this sound, this public recognition. But here's the truth I learned as I stood there. Hearing, it was incidental, it was a side effect. If he saw it, if it stung, that was his journey. To make the true audience for that symphony was my own soul. It was the part of me that had been listening for a whisper of confirmation for so long, finally hearing a full-throated chorus. It was my own spirit finally leaning in, listening, and applauding. The external recognition was just an echo, a reverberation of an internal truth I had already come to know. The validation had already happened in private. The public moment was just a celebration of a victory that was already won. This required a new language. I had to forget the old vocabulary, the words like doubt, fear, not enough, conditional love. They were words from a foreign tongue, a language of lack. I had to learn a new lexicon from the ground up, words like worth, not something given, but something inherent, resilience, the ability to bend in the storm, but not break enough, the most simple yet most powerful word in this new dictionary. And self-love, not a boastful, arrogant thing, but a quiet, steady commitment, like tending a garden. The final breathtaking realization was this: the most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. All the other dialogues with lovers, with critics, with the world are just translations. If the source text is flawed, the translations will be too. But when you learn the native language of your own worth, every other conversation changes. You stop seeking approval and start engaging in exchange. You stop listening for echoes and start speaking your own truth. Some sentences are meant to be broken, they are cages constructed from weak words. And some words are meant to be outgrown like old clothes that no longer fit the person you've become. You shed them, leaving them behind on the floor of the past. And you step forward, speaking a new, more beautiful language into existence with every breath you take. The email arrived on a Tuesday. I was deleting spam. When I saw the subject line, "Congratulations," my heart stopped. I read it 3 times. Before the words made sense, it'd been selected as a finalist. The TV segment was real. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. Everyone would see, he would see. What if I froze? What if I made a fool of myself? The fear was paralyzing. But underneath, it was a current of excitement, so potent it made my fingers tingle. This was it, this was the chance. I threw myself into preparation. I practiced talking about my work until it sounded natural. I channeled every bit of the past, hurt the feeling of not being enough into my preparation. It became my fuel. I decided with a firmness that surprised me not to tell my husband. This journey from the breaking point to this moment was mine. I didn't want his skepticism or his forced encouragement. I needed to do this completely on my own. I told him I had a work conference to attend for a few days. It was the first major lie I'd ever told him, and it felt necessary, like armor. He put his phone down slowly, and I remember the way the light glinted off the screen. As he placed it on the coffee table, he didn't look angry. He looked tired, annoyed even. He sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to drain all the air from the room. "We've been over this," he said, his voice flat. "It's just not realistic. You have a good job. It pays the bills. Why rock the boat?" The day of the broadcast was a blur. The studio was a chaos of bright lights and rushing people. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else live my life. When they did my makeup, I looked in the mirror and saw a confident woman staring back. I barely recognized her. Then I was on the set, sitting on a bright sofa, the host smiling warmly at me. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. The red light on the camera glowed. And then I was just talking. The words came easily. I was talking about my designs, about my inspiration, about the journey. For 3 minutes I was completely and utterly myself. There was no fear, no husband, no past. There was just me and my work. That night at home, I acted normal. I made dinner. We sat in front of the television, like we always did. I had told him my conference had gone fine. Then, during a commercial break, a promo for the next day's show came on. And there I was on our television screen, larger than life. My face, my voice, filling the living room. The silence from his side of the sofa was absolute. I dared a glance at him. He was frozen, leaning forward slightly, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from the screen to me and back again. The segment was short, but it felt like an eternity when it ended. He slowly muted the TV. The room was dead quiet. He turned to me. "Was that you?" I just nodded. He was quiet for a long time. He didn't know what to say. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to reconcile the woman on the screen with the woman he thought he knew. The woman he had told would never be enough. Later that night, he tried to talk about it. He said he was proud. He said he was sorry for what he'd said. Before he said, he never realized how serious I was. The words were there, the right ones, but they landed with a dull thud. The apology felt like it was for him to ease his own guilt more than it was for me. And that's when I had the final quiet realization, the validation I had been craving from him for years, the approval I thought would finally make me feel whole. It meant nothing. It was too late. The journey had changed me. The moment I stepped onto that stage and owned my work, I had already become enough for myself. His stunned silence, his apology, they were just echoes in a room I had already left. The worth I had spent so long building in the shadows was real. And it was mine. It didn't need his signature to be authentic. Being enough was never about his approval. It was always about my own acceptance. And I had finally quietly given it to myself. My heart was pounding. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about feeling like I was contributing something that was mine, something that mattered. I told him I felt like I was disappearing, bit by bit. Every day I gestured, with the notebook, my hands trembling. This feels real to me. This feels like me. JSON parse, or network error, expecting value line 257 column, 1 char 1408. The only light in the room came from the television screen, a silent flickering blue against the walls. It was late. The air was still and heavy. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I was sitting in my usual chair, a book open on my lap. But I wasn't reading a single word. He was on the couch, his back mostly to me, watching some game. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a weight it had been building for weeks, maybe months. A pressure that was starting to crack the foundations of everything. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the low hum of the room like a razor. It was a question, I think, something about a promise he'd made, and broken again. I didn't raise my voice. There was no point. Shouting would have given him an excuse, a reason to dismiss it as just another emotional outburst. So I kept the tone level, almost clinical. But I let every ounce of my disappointment, my exhaustion seep into the words. They were precise, they were chosen for their sharpness. He didn't turn around, not fully. He just tilted his head back slightly enough for me to see the profile of his face illuminated by the TV's glow. And he sighed. It wasn't a sigh of regret or understanding. It was the sigh of a man being bothered by a minor inconvenience. And then he said it. The words were so casual, so effortlessly cruel. He said I was being hysterical over nothing, that I always made mountains out of molehills, that if I spent half the energy on being happy as I did on creating problems, we'd all be better off. The camera in my mind, it zoomed in a close-up on my own hands clenched in my lap. The knuckles were white. Then it pulled focus right onto his face, still half turned away. The flickering light made his expression look bored, impatient. And then the final cut back to me. I felt the words land not like a slap, but like a poisoned dagger, a slow sinking coldness. I could feel the light in my eyes, the hope I'd been clinging to just go out. It was a physical sensation, a dimming, and his final gesture was the twist of the knife. He turned back to the television. He adjusted the volume just a little louder, as if to drown out the last echo of my voice. The dismissal was absolute. I was no longer even in the room. I was a ghost. That was the moment the last thread snapped, sitting there, in the blue half-light, feeling the cold certainty of his indifference wash over me. Something in me broke. But it wasn't a breaking into pieces, it was a breaking open. A quiet, furious resolve began to crystallize in the emptiness he'd left behind. Revenge is a strong word. It wasn't about hurting him. Not really. It was about proving him wrong. It was about taking every whispered insult, every casual dismissal, and forging it into. That's when he said it. He didn't raise his voice, he just looked at me, and his eyes were completely empty. He said, the truth is, y'all never be enough for that world. You're just not. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. Y'all never be enough. Something he could never ignore. The montage began the next morning. Before the sun was up, the world outside the window was still dark, a deep indigo. My small desk in the corner of the bedroom was lit by a single harsh lamp. I opened a notebook. The first page was blank, terrifyingly blank. I put pen to paper, and I wrote, until my hand cramped. Pages of notes, ideas, fragments of dialogue. The room was filled with the sound of the scratching pen, the occasional rustle of a page being turned. The scenes shifted. Late nights, long after he'd gone to sleep, me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at my laptop screen. The soft tapping of the keys was the only sound. Sometimes silent tears would roll down my face, tears of frustration, of doubt. I'd wipe them away angrily and keep typing. This wasn't a time for self-pity. This was a forge. I was in the fire. And there were the contrasting shots, me in my modest space, surrounded by books and papers, working with a quiet intensity, and him in the other room living his life. The sound of his laughter at something on TV, the casual way he'd ask what was for dinner, completely oblivious to the universe of creation, happening just a few feet away. He didn't see the transformation, he didn't notice the slow burn behind my eyes. There was a visual motif through it all. On the windowsill, next to my desk, I had planted a seed. It was a small, unremarkable thing. I watered it every day. At first there was nothing, just dark soil. Then a tiny green shoot pushed its way through. I kept working. The shoot grew into a slender stem. Then leaves began to unfurl. My stack of pages grew thicker. The plant reached for the sunlight, growing stronger, more defined. And I did too. The meek woman who had absorbed those whispered insults was receding. Replaced by someone with a spine of steel, the plant finally formed a bud, a tight, closed fist of potential. And that's when the invitation arrived. It was a single, crisp, heavy-stock envelope. It felt important just to hold it. My name was typed on the front in elegant font. It was an invitation to present my work, my story, at a prestigious event. A national television program was hosting a competition for new voices. My submission had been selected. The finale would be broadcast live. I held that envelope and looked at the plant on the windowsill. The bud was starting to open, showing a flash of deep, vibrant color. Inside, the timing felt like fate. The TV studio was a world of controlled chaos, bright lights on tall stands, cables snaking across the floor, people with headsets talking in quick professional bursts. The air hummed with a different kind of energy than the quiet room I'd left behind. This was electric sharp backstage. It was quieter, a hushed anticipation. I stood in the wings, wearing a dress I'd bought just for this night. It was a color he'd once said was too bold for me. I took a deep breath, a real grounding one. I looked at my reflection in a dark monitor screen. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her posture was straight, her eyes held a calm certainty. This was the unveiling. It wasn't just about the career. I felt the meaning seep into everything. I wasn't enough as a partner. I wasn't enough as a woman with ambition. I wasn't enough, period. The words didn't feel like an insult. They felt like a diagnosis. A final cruel verdict on my entire life. The notebook in my hands suddenly felt foolish, like a child's drawing. I put it down on the arm of the chair, my movements slow and numb. The host announced my name. I walked out into the blinding lights. The stage was vast, and for a moment all I could see was the glare. Then my eyes adjusted to the audience, a sea of dark shapes. The camera lens was a single unblinking eye. This was it. I began to speak. I didn't read from my notes. I knew the story by heart. It was my story. I channeled every moment of feeling small, every dismissed feeling, every whispered insult. But I didn't play it as a victim. I played it with power. I gave voice to the characters. Quiet fury, her determination, her glorious transformation. My voice didn't tremble. It filled the studio. It was captivating. It was a direct contrast to the meek woman in the first act. This was a performance forged in fire. And in a cutaway I would never see but could feel in my bones, he was at home, sitting in the same spot on the couch. The room was dark, bathed only in the blue glow of the television screen. On that screen I was standing tall, my voice clear and strong. The camera caught his face. His jaw was slack with a shock so profound it was almost comical. The expression wasn't just one of surprise. It was dawning horror, the recognition that the person he had dismissed, the life he had taken for granted, had a power and a talent he could never have imagined. He was seeing the result of his own indifference, and it was magnificent. The performance ended. There was a beat of absolute silence, and then the sound washed over me, a standing ovation. The noise was a physical wave, a roar of validation that erased every quiet, cutting word from that dimly lit room. I stood there taking it in, not with a smile of gloating, but with a deep, profound sense of peace. Returning home later that night, the atmosphere was different. The air was charged with a new, unspoken tension. He was waiting for me. He looked smaller somehow, standing in the hallway. He tried to speak. He attempted an apology. The words stumbled out, weak and insignificant. They were about how proud he was, how he never knew. But the words were too late. They were small stones, trying to dam a river that had already flowed to the sea. I didn't need to say much. I didn't need to list his failures. I simply looked at him, and I smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory or revenge. It was a smile of quiet confidence, a smile that said my worth was no longer a topic for debate. It was a settled fact. The question in his eyes was met with a profound, unshakable silence. He was seeking an answer, an explanation, maybe even forgiveness. But what he got was an echo, the echo of his own dismissal, now returned to him by a woman who had grown beyond his reach. I didn't say a word. I just walked past him through the hallway and into the living room. I turned on the lamp next to my chair, flooding my corner of the room with a warm yellow light. He remained standing in the hallway, shrouded in the dimness. The final shot was this: me sitting in the light, a book open on my lap, truly reading this time, and him, a silhouette in the doorway, trapped in the shadow of his own making. I had walked into a new dawn, and I had left the darkness behind. All right, so you want to know how I did it, how I went from crying on my kitchen floor to seeing my face on a television screen. You want the real steps, not just the feel-good stuff. Because when someone you trusted looks you in the eye and tells you with that quiet certainty that you're just not enough, it doesn't just sting, it sinks into your bones. It becomes a cold weight in your chest. I get it. I was there. I didn't say anything else. I just got up and walked out of the room. I went upstairs and stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. In the mirror, the person looking back at me was a stranger, hollowed, invisible. I kept hearing his voice on a loop. Never be enough. It was like he had finally voiced the secret fear I'd carried my whole life. The one I'd managed to keep buried under a mountain of shoulds and havitos. He had just confirmed my deepest insecurity, and the terrifying part was in that moment. But that weight, that specific cold feeling, can become your fuel if you let it. This is how you let it. Step 1. Reframe the narrative. The first thing you have to do, and you have to do it immediately, is get it out of your head and onto paper. Don't let it fester in the dark corners of your mind, where it can grow and distort. You need to see it in the light. So you take a notebook, a fresh page, and you write it down word for word. You write, "He said you're not enough." And just seeing it there in your own handwriting does something. It takes his voice and makes it just words on a page. It's a start. Then you draw a line down the middle of the page. On the left side, you write the heading, his words, and you list them all, every single doubt he ever planted. You don't have the talent. You're not tough enough for this industry. It's a silly dream. You write it all down. Don't hold back. Let it be ugly. On the right side, you write a new heading, the truth. This is where you fight back, but not with emotion, with facts. This isn't about feeling better, it's about seeing clearer. So, for you don't have the talent, you write the truth. You write, "I spent 3 years in acting classes. I received positive feedback from my instructor on my emotional range. I have performed in 6 local theater productions. See the difference?" His words are an opinion, a verdict. The truth is evidence, it's data. For you're not tough enough, you write, "I have worked 2 jobs to pay for my headshots. I have faced a dozen rejections. And I am still here, still trying." That is the definition of toughness. For it's a silly dream. You write, "Every great achievement started as someone's silly dream. The desire itself is the proof of its validity." This exercise, it breaks the emotional spell. It transfers the power from his judgment to your reality. The mindset shift is this: you stop viewing his comment as a final verdict on your life, and you start seeing it as a challenge, a dare. That initial sting of anger, that hot flash of pain, when you remember his face, that's your kindling. Use it to light a fire under yourself. Just for a little while, just to get you moving. The opinion of someone who doesn't believe in you is irrelevant. Data, you acknowledge it, you file it away, and you move on to the facts that actually matter. Your facts. I believed him. Step 2. Create a stealth operation plan. Once you've reframed the narrative, you need a battle plan. And this part is crucial. You keep it to yourself. This is a stealth operation. You do not announce your plans to people who have already shown you their disbelief. You do not post about your auditions on social media for him to see. You protect your energy like it's the most valuable currency you have, because it is. Your goal needs to be specific and action-oriented. It can't be, "I want to be famous," or "I want to prove him wrong." That's too vague. And it keeps the focus on him. Your goal should be something entirely within your control. "I will audition for 10 roles this month. I will write 5 new pages of my script every week. I will practice my monologue for 30 minutes each day." This is your mission, and you are the only one who needs to know the details. I used a private digital board, like a Trello board. I had columns for auditions, to research monologues, to prepare submissions sent, and callbacks. Every time I moved a card from one column to the next, it was a tiny silent victory. No one celebrated it but me, and that was the point. This journey became mine alone. The focus has to be on the process, not the outcome. You have to fall in love with the daily grind, the early mornings, the vocal warm-ups, the tedious research, the feeling of your craft getting sharper. That's what sustains you. The outcome, booking the TV spot, that's just a byproduct. If you're only in it for the result, the rejection will destroy you. But if you're in it for the love of the work itself, then every single day you spend on your craft is a day you've already won. It's a day you've defied the prophecy. Step 3. Build an unshakable foundation. You cannot do this alone. You just can't. The world will throw enough rejection at you. You don't need to live in a vacuum of negativity. So you have to be intentional about your support system. Identify 2 or 3 people, just a handful, who genuinely, unconditionally want to see you succeed. The friend who texts you good luck before an audition without you asking. The family member who listens to you vent without trying to fix it. These are your people. Nurture those relationships. Be vulnerable with them. Tell them when it's hard. Let them cheer for you. Their belief will become a shield when the doubts try to creep back in. Next, build a routine. This is non-negotiable. Your days cannot be left to chance. Your routine is your foundation. Mine looked like this: wake up at 6, meditate for 10 minutes, to clear my head, an hour of vocal and physical exercise, a healthy breakfast, then 3 hours of focused work on my craft edition tapes. Research classes. The afternoons were for my survival job, and the evenings were for rest and connection with my support system. This structure meant that even on days I felt worthless even on days. His voice echoed in my mind. I still did the things the routine carried me forward when my motivation failed. I slept in the spare room that night. The bed was cold, and I lay there for hours staring at the ceiling. The pain was a physical weight on my chest. But as the night wore on, something shifted. A strange cold clarity settled over me. The pain of staying exactly where I was, of continuing to be this diminished version of myself, suddenly felt far greater than any fear I had about trying and failing. The risk of humiliation seemed smaller than the certainty of this slow, quiet death of the spirit. The words "Yal, and you have to embrace failure." Rejection is not proof that he was right. Rejection is redirection. Every no is steering you away from what isn't right for you, and toward what is. I started a journal where I would reframe every rejection. Instead of "I didn't get the part id right, this role wasn't the right fit, and the universe is protecting me for something better." It sounds cheesy, but it rewires your brain. You stop seeing rejection as a personal failure and start seeing it as a necessary part of the path. Celebrate every single win, no matter how small. Finished your stealth plan for the week? That's a win. Nailed your monologue in practice? That's a win. Had a good conversation with a supportive friend? That's a win. Each one is a brick in the foundation of your new confidence. Each one is a quiet act of defiance. Step 4: execute and embrace your spotlight. Then it happens. The opportunity comes. The audition for the TV show, the callback, the meeting. And when it does, you are ready, not just because you've practiced your lines, but because you've lived this journey. You walk into that room, and you are no longer the person who was told they weren't enough. You are the person who has built a secret empire of discipline and self-belief. In that moment, you channel everything: the pain of his words, the quiet strength from your routine, the love from your support system, the resilience from all the rejections you've weathered. You pour it all into your performance. That depth of feeling, that realness, is what they're looking for. It's what makes you unforgettable. And when you get the call, when they say, "You got the part," the feeling is not what you might expect. It's not a loud, triumphant roar aimed at him. It's a deep, quiet, profound peace. It's a confirmation. You look at yourself in the mirror, and you know that his words were never about your capability. They were about his own limitations. Your success is your answer. No words are needed. The goal was never to prove him wrong. It was to prove yourself right, to validate the tiny, stubborn voice inside you that never stopped whispering that you were capable of more. The TV spot, the recognition, it's just the physical manifestation of a truth you built for yourself brick by brick. So here is the final piece of advice, the one that everything else leads to. Your worth is non-negotiable. It is not up for debate. It is not determined by a role, a review, or the opinion of someone who cannot see your light. Do not give anyone the power to define it for you. You take that power back, one reframed thought, one secret plan, one small win at a time, and you build a life so bright that the shadows of their doubt simply disappear. The cracks were always there. If I am honest, you just learn to ignore them, or you tell yourself they're a normal part of the furniture of a long marriage. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was 1,000 little ones, a slow, steady erosion. I remember when I first talked about going back to school, I was so excited my hands were practically shaking. I laid out the brochures on the kitchen table, the course requirements, my whole plan. And he just looked at them. He didn't pick them up. He said, "That's a big commitment. Are you sure you can handle it with your job?" It was phrased like concern, but it felt like a dismissal. The enthusiasm just drained right out of me. Be enough stopped being a sentence and started becoming a challenge, a very quiet, very personal declaration of war. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I was going to try, not for him, for me. It became a pattern. Whenever I had a success, a small win at work, he'd find a way to minimize it. "That's great, honey," he'd say. But then he'd immediately follow it with, "But don't get your hopes up too high," or he'd compare it to something one of his colleagues had done, something bigger, more important. He never outright said I couldn't do something. It was more subtle than that. It was a lack of faith, a constant low-level doubt, that became the background noise of our life together. I started to realize there was an imbalance. I was changing, growing. I was hungry for new challenges, for a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. And he was the same, perfectly content. He had his routine, his job, his weekend. Projects my ambition, my restlessness. It didn't fit into that picture. It made him uncomfortable. I think deep down, it triggered an insecurity in him that he'd never admit to. There was this unspoken contract between us. I see that now the expectation was that I would stay manageable, that my world would remain centered on our home on him, that my dreams would be small domestic things, that he could understand and feel secure about my journey, was supposed to be our journey. And when I started to map out a path that was just for me, it broke that contract. The arguments we did have about money, about time, about anything, they were never really about those things. They were symptoms. Cause was this fundamental shift he couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. And then, the silence set in. It was the quietest, most lonely sound I've ever known. We were still living in the same house, sharing the same bed. But we were living parallel lives. The emotional withdrawal was total. I stopped sharing my victories with him. Because I didn't want to face the lukewarm response. I stopped talking about my fears and my doubts. Because I knew he wouldn't have the capacity to hold them. My journey became my secret. I had a whole other life he knew nothing about. I'd be working on a project late at night, and he'd come to the door of the study, standing there for a moment before saying good night. There was a tangible divide right there in the hallway. You could feel it. He was on his side, I was on mine. I think part of him knew something was different, but he chose willful ignorance. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to confront the fact that I was changing, and that our marriage might not survive the change. The resentment on my side started to grow, a cold, hard knot in my chest, every time he made a casual comment about my little classes, or asked when I was going to be done with all this. It tightened, and with every tightening the hope for reconciliation faded. Hope is a fragile thing, it needs to be nurtured, and ours was just starved. We were two ghosts passing in the hallways, polite strangers who happened to share a mortgage. The broadcast that was the shockwave, it was the catalyst that shattered the glass wall between our two parallel lives. I remember sitting on the couch watching it with him. He was there out of a sense of obligation. I think he was half looking at his phone. And then my segment came on, and I saw myself on that screen talking about my work, my research, with a passion and an authority I didn't even recognize in myself. I saw the person I had become. I stole a glance at him. The phone was down, his whole body was still. He was watching, really watching. And I saw the shock on his face. It wasn't just surprise, it was a dawning realization. He was seeing me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. And in that moment, I didn't know what his reaction was. Was it genuine admiration? Or was it just shock at losing control of the narrative, the shock of realizing the person he thought he knew, the person he thought he had contained, was someone entirely different? The silence after the segment ended was heavier than any wed had before. It was a silence you could drown in. And then the inevitable conversation began. It started with him. He said I had no idea. And those 4 words opened the floodgates. All the accusations I'd held back for years came pouring out. The apologies he offered felt hollow, reflexive. They were apologies for not paying attention, but not for the underlying doubt, for the years of subtle diminishment.